Good morning, everybody. Welcome for being here at Maarten's talk. One thing that I always personally really like from these conferences that a lot of the people I talk with online, they're like just literally the name, right? The GitHub tag or the avatar. Maarten-Jan has been that for years. For me, at least, right? Although you know you're a person, right?
2019 or something?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Always really enjoyed the conversations and the fixing things and figuring things out. I heard a little bit of what you're going to talk about. I think it's very curious and going to be very interesting. So, yeah, please give it up for Maarten-Jan.
Well, thank you, and thank you all for showing up. Big crowd. I'm not nervous at all, so that's fine. So I'm going to talk to you about event sourcing and how it can help you through... I have a bit of a crackle, haven't I? Better? Okay, cool. How event sourcing can help you through the timeline hell we are, have been going through still at the Dutch Kadaster. This is really a story from the trenches. My name is Maarten-Jan. I'm a software engineer working at a small consultancy company, Craftsman, and the Dutch Kadaster graciously allowed me to talk about their business. They did tell me to get some other people from the Kadaster to audit me, so there are like on the second row here 4 people who can correct me if I'm saying something stupid or if I don't know the answer to the question. So I'm going to talk about the Dutch Kadaster and specifically about the product I've been working on in the last 10 years for about 6, 7, Koers. So first off, let's talk a bit about the Kadaster, what it is, for people who do not know. So the Dutch Kadaster is a government agency tasked by law to essentially keep track of who owns what in the Netherlands with regard to real estates. And you have to think about landlots and apartments. And this is all together kept in a registration, and that's named in Dutch the Basisregistratie Kadaster, which is essentially government assigned to be, this registration is very important. And Koers, the product I've been working on with a lot of other people obviously, is the cadastral objects and rights system. And what Koers does is we receive notary deeds from notaries, which we process and update the registration. So if someone sells their house, we will get a deed and we'll process the information to the registration so you can see the new owner. Allard said that the mainframe time was between the 50s and the 70s, I think he said yesterday in the talk. We replaced an old mainframe system in 2018, so I don't know about those timelines, but sure. I think there's still some around in the Netherlands, but not at the Kadaster, so that's very cool. We went live with our with Koers in 2018, and we're building up events since then. So back in 2015-14, I think it was decided to use event sourcing for Koers. You may wonder why. Well, I guess no one here wonders why, but still, there are very good reasons to do so. So let's go through them. Because there are several domain characteristics that easily fit the event sourcing paradigm. As I said, deeds lead to changes to cadastral objects, which essentially are plots of lands. That's the main business of Koers. So it's relatively easy to see that a deed can be seen as a command, while the cadastral object, the plot of land, is the aggregate on which the command acts, which ultimately leads to events that need to produce a state view, a view of a moment in time, who owns this plot of land at what time, and those are the projections we make. And that's the main topic of today, important part of the registration as well is that there needs to be a possibility for time travel, there needs to be a history model, and we need to have bitemporal data in our registration. So there are several timelines of which we're going to talk a lot about. So there is essentially the formal timeline, which basically means when does a change in the registration become legally valid. But there's also a technical timeline, and that's more about when was the change processed. So these are different timelines, and both are important. And we needed a way to keep track of that, and event sourcing, well, events, appending events, appending events, appending events is a very nice fit. At least you have the technical timeline then in order, right? I mean, it fits very well. So some numbers to give you a bit of a context. I don't know if people who were here in the previous presentation were not that big. They had like 20 clusters, etc. So we started out in October 2018 with about 100 million events for our registration. So we migrated to the state of October 2018 basically. And by now we've more than doubled it to up to 215 million events. That's about 60,000 events per day. I did not check that calculation actually, I got it from an earlier slide, so maybe you can do some calculations on that. Working days, I think. And we're talking about, there are about 10 million of aggregates, so cadastral objects, and that's a number that remains relatively static. Plots of lands get merged and they get split, but on average it stays relatively the same number at least. There's also a deed context in which the processing of the deeds, it goes a bit faster over there. So we're up to 900 million events with 600,000 events per day. And each deed is its own aggregate. So that's a bit of the numbers. In short, a bit on our tech stack. So we are using Axon's framework and Axon server. We're running three node cluster. Okay, there we are. And connected to those are about 35 mostly Spring Boot, Kotlin and Java microservices that produce and read the events. Several of which make projections which we store in a Postgres database. So let's connect the business of the Kadaster to the event sourcing paradigm by using some examples, some typical examples. So first off, a transfer of ownership. I'm actually going to use the example that I'm going to sell my house to a team member of mine. He's in the room, so maybe you can raise your hand, Gerlo. In this example, okay, so we go to the notary, we sign a deed. I'm going to sell my house to Gerlo, which it is in the deed, and the Kadaster receives this deed. And in cadastral terms, each deed or each plot of land has a number. In this example, we are using Apeldoorn L337, and this must be transferred from me to Gerlo. So we have the transfer command, which is essentially the deed, which is loaded to the aggregate. I guess I'm using aggregate a lot because I did not know yet about Axon 5, so we'll change the slides for next year, right? So you load up the aggregate. We're doing some validation. The Kadaster checks: am I actually legally allowed to sell this house? Am I the owner? Am I the only owner? Are there no other rights on the plot, etc., etc.? There's a lot of checks going on over there. And if we're fine, if the notary has done his job well, we produce new events to reassign the ownership of the plot of land, which then work their way through to our projections, and which will also lead to new commands like invoicing, very important. Kadaster needs to make money as well, and notifying Gerlo of that, hey Gerlo, the ownership has been registered at the Kadaster. Unfortunately, or well, I guess, well, let's leave the fortunate or unfortunately where it is. Well, it is unfortunate. Dutch plots of lands are generally pretty expensive, so people need to take a loan. So it's very common to have, together with a transfer of ownership deed, a mortgage deed as well. So again, I can leave after signing the transfer of ownership, but Gerlo has to stay at the notary to sign his mortgage deed, which essentially you are giving the bank the right to sell your house if you're not unable to pay the loan. That's what a mortgage is, right? And this right is registered at the Kadaster as well. So in this example, we're registering a mortgage on the plot of land Apeldoorn L337. So again, we have the aggregate, we load our events, the mortgage is resulting in an event if the validation is correctly, which leads to a mortgage being established on the plot of land, which will result in updating the projections and do some invoicing. I'm going to take a brief sip of water. So these projections, what do they look like? So as I said, we have multiple timelines. In our projections we keep per deed and per formal timestamp the state of the cadastral object, the plot of land. What happened. So in this example, apparently I bought my house before we went live with Koes, so before October 2018. So the first row in our table is that I own the plot of land. And then we see two deeds which have the same formal timestamp but were processed one after the other. Where first Gerlo owns the land because of the transfer of ownership, and then the other deed results in adding the mortgage to the plot of land. So that's how we generally save our projections and expose this, usually through REST interfaces. So now let's get into the timestamps and the timeline hell, I guess, which is actually very common oftentimes. So to a deed there are several timestamps that are important. There's the moment in time where the deed has been signed at the notary. There's a moment in time when we as the cadaster receive the deed. But unfortunately there are two timestamps attached to this term, because there's a formal timestamp which can only be between 9 and 3 on working days, because those are the official opening hours of the cadaster. It's a government agency. And there is because nowadays nowadays we have email, we have APIs through which notaries can offer up deed information, so we can essentially receive them 24/7. So there is also an actual timestamp attached to when we receive the deed, and I would call that a technical timestamp. Then we have a time of processing, so that's obviously after receival, but it may take some time to receive, so it may even be several days later than when we receive the deed, especially if we receive it as a PDF, then a cadaster employee has to look at it and enter it in the system. And ultimately we have the time when the result of the registration becomes visible in the projections, right? That's the eventual consistency Allard talks a lot about, so I'm not going to. But there is a time between processing and seeing the result in the projections as well. So if we get back to our example of the transfer of ownership from my house to Gerlo, let's say this deed has been offered up through the API. We were at the notary at 2:30 on a Friday afternoon. That's the time of signing. We received as the cadaster the deed technically at 3:30, but yeah, that's after 3, so it will receive the formal timestamp of next Monday 9 a.m. We are processing the deed immediately because we're receiving it through the API, so we can automatically process the deed, so that goes on almost instantly. So let's say at 3:31. And I thought of another bullet, but it wasn't coming, so let's just move on. We're in a curious situation here where the deed has been processed before it has been received, right? So that's kind of weird. What does this look like, and at what time can you see in the registration what has actually happened? Who owns the plot of land at what point in time? And I've tried to draw this. So on the horizontal axis you have and it's just outside of the screen, unfortunately. But on the horizontal axis it's the formal timeline, and on the vertical axis we have the technical timeline. And ideally they are the same. That's what the dotted line indicates. So if you put in the most important timestamps of the example I just gave, the deed was signed formally as well as technically on Friday, but it was processed technically on Friday, but formally on Monday, right? So very much depending on how you look at this data, depends on what you will see. So if you look at it on the formal timestamp at 3:31, I am still the owner according to the Kadaster. While if you look at it technically at 3:31, Gerlo will be the owner, and only on Monday 9 a.m. Will you see that Gerlo is formally, according to the Kadaster, the owner of the plot. The transfer of ownership has been processed. So, and this is a quite common but already quite complicated example. And then we get to the really complicated stuff, because there's this unfortunate situation that people make mistakes. For not many. I have to emphasize, I mean, they're sitting here on the second row and they can attack me at any time. The Dutch Kadaster is a very good registration. They tell me and I believe them. And it's one of the best in the world. So we have very good data on who owns what in the Netherlands, right? It's very reliable. But still, it's work done by humans, so mistakes are made, even though they are rare. So just want to preface that. And when mistakes are made and these are corrected, this has impact on our timelines. So the first example of who can make a mistake is the notary, and depending on who makes the mistakes, it has different impact. So if a notary makes a mistake, it can be found through the validation we do from the Kadaster. So we tell the Kadaster, hey, you sold the house, but Maarten-Jan isn't the owner, so you made a mistake. He can also, he or she, I guess, send in improvement deed on his own. And this can be as short as last month I gave you a deed which said the plot was transferred to John, but I'm sorry, I should have said John and Jane. He forgot the 5, probably he. So we need to correct this mistake, right? And what happens to our events and what happens to our timeline is the question. So the Kadaster is in the fortunate position of, well, sometimes it's seen as an unfortunate position, but we are by law forced to follow the deeds. So the deeds are always right, even if they are wrong, that's what the Kadaster has to follow. So we are not going to amend the timeline. We are just going to treat the improvement the notary gave us as just another deed, essentially. So if we go back to our graph, the original deed was received in September, technically as well as formally, while the improvement deed is received in October, technically as well as formally. So that's nice on the dotted line, so that's relatively easy. So if we draw in, look at the formal timeline, before the original deed, Susan and Peter are the owners, and after the original deed, the transfer of ownership has gone to John, and after the mistake is corrected, John and Jane will be the owner. So formally, in between, this mistake will still be visible in our formal timeline. When the Kadaster makes a mistake, so if we enter the deed data wrong, the Kadaster employee forgets Jane, we are recovering this mistake. So there is no new deed in case the Kadaster makes a mistake, and we are going to correct this mistake and erase it from the formal timeline. So again, if we then look at the graph, the original deed still was in September, formally as well as technically. The correction was technically in October, but we're correcting it back to September, right? So after the correction, it won't be visible anymore in our formal timeline. It's Susan and Peter, and after the correction, it will be John and Jane. A sip of water. So if the Kadaster employee makes a mistake, we correct our timeline. now we come to the rarest of mistakes. This is so rare. No, I'm joking. Bugs happen, of course, all the time, and we need to fix them, and that's part of our job. A fact of life, even. So if we find a bug, we fix it, obviously, and it depends on the kind of bug where it needs to be fixed, right? So if we have a bug in a projection, what we generally do after fixing the bug, we see if it has affected our persistence in our Postgres database, and if so, we will replay the affected aggregate or even the entire data the microservice manages, right? So in order to correct all the projections. A bit of a harder fix is when there is a mistake made in the producing of events, and what we essentially then do is the same as what we would have done when a Kadaster employee makes a mistake. We recover the mistake by adding new events, right? If it affects a lot of aggregates, if it's a big mistake, we may automate that. But generally, especially, we had some big ones right after we went live, but nowadays they are generally not that big, and we just hand them over to the recovery team. There's a specific team dedicated to fixing mistakes in the registration. We say, sorry, we made a mistake in our code. Can you fix these 3 things? And they say, okay, we'll do it. And then it's recovered, right? So it's important to emphasize fixing a mistake like that is essentially not different from any other command we have. The command processing is a bit more complicated, but still, ultimately, it's a command, a correction command that acts on an aggregate, and that leads to a correction event. So it's an append-only system, right? Which we will probably all know, which ultimately affects the projection. The interesting part of this, so I guess we're very happy with doing event sourcing and using the Axon framework, especially for the left part, because we got that down, right? We have our technical timeline perfect, we append events, and can perfectly see what happens over time. The interesting part is how are we going to deal with correcting these mistakes, and how are we going to inform our clients on stuff like this? That's the big question, which is mostly on the projection side of things. So, as I explained, when the Kadaster makes a mistake, we correct our formal timeline, which we should, because it has to fit the deeds. But what we are essentially doing is rewriting our own history, right? Which in effect means that if a client looks at the data on Monday and looks at the data on Wednesday, it may be different, but there is no indication to why it has changed. There was no deed, right? And that's done. That can be unfortunate, and because, well, if you talk about real estate, it can involve a lot of money, right? So if bad decisions are made on bad information, it can have huge effects. So the question then becomes, how do we inform our clients about these mistakes and about these corrections, and how do we get them to know what happened? Or in another way, how are we going to tell them about our technical timeline in a reliable way? And thirdly, how are we going to deal with errors in the projections? If you fix a bug in a projection and you do a replay, there are no new events, right? So your data may change without new events. It can be very hard to. How do you deal with that, right? That's the question. There are people at the Kadaster who say you should never replay. Well, that's an opinion. But they have a point in the sense that I'm running out of dimensions on my graph. Besides the formal and the technical timeline you have, which we can very well model through our events, there's also a projection timeline where bug fixes over time and replays over time also change what the client ultimately sees on the screen, right? So there's a gap there which we need to solve. So we have made in the last several years several attempts on to fixing this problem, at least to a degree. and essentially our first attempt was to build technical projection so that you can just ask for the information on the technical timeline, and what we then do is play the events of that aggregate on the fly and build up the projection and give it to the client. Which has several downsides because, well, doing this on the fly is pretty slow, or can be pretty slow, especially if it's a big aggregate. And this approach does not take bugs in the projection into account, right? And what we see is that it's not being used much. So there's also a question, and that's not really a question I can answer, is what are our clients actually looking for, right? When is this relevant information, and when isn't it? Should we put in a lot of time to build this, or shouldn't we? So our second attempt, which is not one we were a fan of, there was this project within the Kadaster to get one really big relational database and unite all the data from all the teams involved with the registration, of which Koers is just one of them, and we should track all timelines per entity in that database. And this is a screenshot of all the fields involved with timelines in that relational database per table, and I counted them before. There are 17. Yeah. So this is kind of a struggle to. So we are doing event sourcing at Koers, but not all teams within the Kadaster are doing event sourcing, and there are very varying opinions on how to actually approach these kinds of issues. With regard to relational database and getting our data inside of a relational database, we ran into many problems. But I'm going to mention some that are related to timelines. So one thing we encountered was, so the Kadaster has a nice model on how the data should be stored, and the relational database forces you to, well, you should, what's the word? Adhere to the model, right? And you're forced to adhere to the model. But what if you have data in your events that doesn't fit the model? And you want to keep a technical timeline. You don't want to, so you have data that doesn't fit the model because of a bug of earlier, and you want to put it in the relational database, but you can't. We had a description field that has should have a maximum length of 250 characters, but we had descriptions running into 300 characters. And because you want to keep the technical timeline forever, how do you fit this in a relational database? You can't. So this is essentially an unresolved issue. Another really hard part was how. So if we put everything in a relational database and the other teams do that as well, and you have 17 fields related to timelines, and you're talking about the same kind of objects, so the cadastral objects, the plots of lands, we keep ownership information about plots of lands. There are other teams that keep geometric data about plots of lands. And uniting these timelines can be a really big challenge and can go out of sync, right? And uniting that is, well, really hard and hasn't been solved either, right? A bit. And ultimately, if you're trying to put everything in one database and you're trying to unite all data from all the teams together, you're forced to solve essentially all the issues that you have with your data all at once, because, well, otherwise it just won't fit in the database, right? Which is unfortunate in the case when it's not being used much. So we are of the approach to build projections of our data to serve a specific need for a specific client. Well, this is completely the other way around, right? So you have this giant database to answer all questions for everyone, which and you end up with a situation where you're solving a lot of problems to get the data correctly in the database, while no one is asking for that information specifically. So we were not a fan. So what should the future look like? At least according to me, this is my opinion. I have several ideas. I think, and well, probably preaching to the choir here, I think the future is event-driven. We should focus more on the events. We have our, like I said, the event timeline we got down. That's really good. The good part of the registration. So one thing we can do is persist our projections per event time and no longer do them on the fly. That would be at least a step to give clients the ability to ask questions about the technical timeline, which is not perfect because you're not taking projection errors into account, but it's at least something. But I think we should move the clients closer to the events and have the clients build up their projections on their own. And with clients, I mean other teams within the Kadaster, but maybe even also in the outside world. Why can't the text office listen to our events instead of getting state objects only? Because ultimately, if you're interested in timelines, then you're probably interested in what actually happened, right? And hey, we got these events. They tell you what happened, so why don't we just give them those? So it's also kind of sidestepping the issue, because when we are no longer making projections, we don't have issues with projections. But yeah, that's probably what they're interested in, right? And another thing I've been thinking about lately is, and we already have that for partly, we could just inform people on when a correction has been made. So hey, you looked at this data on Monday. It has been changed. If we know who looked at the data, we can inform them on the change, right? Or if it concerns you, hey, hello, your plot of land, has been a correction made. You should know. So we could bring it more to the clients in that way. So those are several ideas I have. And with that, I'm ending my presentation, so I thank you very much for your attention, and I think we have some time for questions.
Hi, very nice. Nice presentation, very interesting problem. I just saw that you started in 2018, and what happened with the data, with the historical data? So did you somehow transfer them as well, or is it just like day zero for you? And
no, well, the Kadaster still has data from before 2018, right? So I mean, we exist for almost 200 years, and we have a lot. But Goose, we essentially only transferred to the current state of back then. So within Course, we now have 7 years of history.
Do you plan to upload them back, or just where they are?
Well, I plan to, but I'm not the boss of the Kadaster. So there are other ways in which that data is exposed. There are different, yeah, approaches.
Why they did not say, okay, we have this initial point, we're gonna take all the historical data.
Yeah, the previous system was not event sourced, right? So the history is only in the deeds, I guess. Yeah.
Any more questions? Let's do those through the microphone so that it's being recorded.
I wonder if you have different commands for the corrections coming from technical problems. Are those commands different to other types of corrections?
Well, yes. I mean, there are different commands. So we have about between 150 and 200 kinds of deeds. One of which is the improvement deed. So that's an official deed from the notary, right? And there's also, that's not a deed, so we have also the possibility, we call that a cadastral deed, but it's not a real deed, it's a change made by the Kadaster, and so there, the process is kind of similar, but it's not deed-based, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep, that's what I meant. Thank you.
I have a compliance question. You mentioned, I just wanted to clarify that there is no misunderstanding. You said something, you erase history, so it's not visible when there certain mistakes happen. But if you're audited, I assume you need to be explicit. So I would assume you don't really erase things. It's
we keep the events, right?
Yeah.
So we know in our event store what happened. So erase is maybe an unfortunate choice of words.
So if an auditor
projections.
If an auditor comes to your business, then you of course have to show everything, including the correction of the mistakes.
Yes, we can. We have them in the events, right?
Okay.
Yeah. It's just how do we present this information to our clients? That's the big question.
Anybody here? If not,
well, we're
then I think,
around. So if you think
if you
of
have more
anything,
questions later on, definitely go for Maarten-Jan. Let's one last round of applause for him. Thanks.